Located around what is now modern day Iraq, was a thriving cultural and political center called Babylon. Adiris, no older than 5, was abandoned in the sweltering desert heat, forced to walk through burning sands seeking asylum within the Temple of Purgation in Babylon. Aban stands out from the crowd of imposing high priests. When she cries, instead of looking at her with disdain or even mild annoyance, Haban lifts Adiris and dries her tears. He teaches her of their religion, introducing her to each of the statues in turn.
Rishon, keeper of the stars, or Tares, sentry of the desert, Atil Alara, mother of humanity.
In time, Haban became Adiris's teacher, and soon her father, the closest thing to a family she could ever have since being abandoned. Her new life became a routine of tending the gardens, preparing meals, and polishing equipment for ceremonies in service of the gods. The years flew by in quiet devotion, gaining new responsibilities as she became of age. She would cleanse the temple, assisting priests with purification, and attending the yearly worshipping of the god of water and creation, the sea goat, with the high priests. With worship came sacrifice.
May your voice reach the beyond. May your voice reach the beyond. May your voice. Adiris speaks this line until it becomes a single word, babbled in harmony with her fellow emissaries in faith. May your voice breathe the beyond. May your voice breathe the beyond. 13 women stand in a circle around a stone altar. Adiris's chant falters as time passes, her raw throat the only indication she contributes. Each enunciation, agony. She's nearly forgotten the naked man writhing face down on the altar, leather straps binding him.
She became no stranger to the sickening sounds of ripping flesh and snapping bones. Even still, the sight alone could make her retch. The only solace she allowed herself was reinforcement of her teachings.
Adiris composes herself, recites sacred text in her mind. The plans of the gods shall not be questioned, for they know beauty the human eye cannot perceive. The plans of the gods shall not be questioned, for they know.
Her once devout teacher instilled in her what truly mattered: the meaning in servitude and the comfort in knowing suffering is love. The blood sacrifice may make her sick, but they could never shake her resolve and belief in the gods. The same could not be said for Haban. Tears would slip from the corners of his eyes when he thought no one would see. His stride was slowed from the heavy weight on his heart, and his voice would trail when reading religious texts aloud. He once stood energized by generous sacrifices to the gods. Today, he shows anguish. Once he would revel in the acts with devout fervor. However, upon prodding, he shows indifference to the acts. This must be a test, Adiris thought to herself, as if by instinct she repeated. It was commanded by the gods. He swims in the wake of the sea goat now.
Haban turns his attention to the game board, flicks away Adiris's disc, and positions his at the end. It seems I have won, as was commanded by the gods. Adiris pushes her chair back, objecting. Haban sweeps the board off the table. I shall write the rules of anew. I shall include decrees, punishment, theft, and sacrifice. And should anyone object, I shall preach those momentous words. It was commanded by the bloody sea-goat and his damned gods.
This was blasphemy, Adiris thought. The truth often is. Once a month, the Temple of Purgation hosts a ceremony to prefer the congregation of all sin, called the Day of Virtue. With their foreheads pressed into the stone floor, they grovel before the maiden guard.
Under the eyes of the sea-goat, speak of the evil you have witnessed. Deliver us thieves, adulterers, and blasphemers, so we may purge them. I have witnessed no evil.
Why had she lied? The visions of her adopted father swam through her head. She braced herself for any punishment should the maiden guard find out her dishonesty. However, none came. The guard nodded, weaving her way past bodies on the floor. The fear alone could have collapsed Adiris, but she had steeled her nerves against herself. Duties must resume. Day-to-day life halts for no guilty conscience. While sweeping the dirt from around the altar, Haban rushed to her side. He tried to appeal to Adiris, pleading, begging even, for her to cast aside the teachings he instilled inside of her from childhood, and to leave the temple with him. Adiris, with a sliver of doubt in her heart and mind, prays before the gods. She tried in vain, over and over, begging and pleading for a sign, until her knees were bruised from kneeling on the rough stone floor. Her silent screams echoed in her mind as she shakily rose from the floor, turning her back on the temple. Everything she ever believed had been a lie. She was distraught that she almost missed it. A whisper, quiet, but there. None of the words were audible, but it made one fact brutally clear.
She will never be alone. Ever.
Her lapse in resolve only strengthened her faith in the gods. Suffering, Adiris recalled, is true love. To show the gods her unwavering faith, she committed self-flagellation until her skin was so torn and raw it barely clung to her muscles by wisps. Her atonement was severe, draining her of strength. Despite the pain, Adiris forced her body to move, as if possessed by divine will. She headed to the private quarters of the Maiden Guard, stole a uniform, and filled a censer with oil and glowing embers. Under the cover of night, she strode along the path, barefoot and feverish. Beyond the mouth of the temple stood Haban. In the moonlight, he seemed so small and frail.
Adanika dingia! Hurry! Leah! Manure!
Life more or less returned to normal for Adiris, assisting the high priests with purifications, cleansing, cleaning. However, everything seemed to be increasing at an alarming rate. Every day brought a slew of the sick to the Temple of Purgation. The plague, once contained, now ran rampant in the streets of Babylon. No one was safe from its septic touch, even the priests tasked to purify it from the masses. One by one they fell, too weak to continue, leaving Adiris the sole person fit to complete the rituals. Before her ceremony, her anxiety swelled in her chest. She sought solace in the chambers of her teachers, seeking their fleeting presence for comfort and security. Upon lighting a candle, she noticed a gap in the wall, barely caught by a flicker of light. She squeezed through, finding a hidden chamber just below the sanctuary. It was nearly barren, save for a statue of a golden woman adorned with expensive jewelry. The time had come for her to perform the ritual. Adira stepped into the great hall, the followers bowing to her as she reached the altar. She lifted the silver dagger, leading attention to the jewels adorning her hands. Her youth and beauty already stood her apart from the other high priests, or what was left, but her lavish appearance stunned the crowd. Adiris began to recite the epic of creation, causing a woman to stumble and collapse near the back. Without even a moment to think, much less hesitate, she swiped her dagger across her skin, severing her own toe in devotion to the gods. Protect this woman! Adiris pleaded. The plague had reared its head once more in her congregation, and, as its new high priestess, she was in service of protecting them. Faith alone was no protection from the symptoms. A nasty cough of blood and mucus, abscesses filled with inky pus, and the stump of her foot grew gangrenous. Ashamed of her affliction, she donned a headdress and carried a censer to cover the smell of sickness with frankincense. Despite her trials, she continued to try healing the infected. When her resolve was at its lowest, she made a bid to the gods for salvation. Adiris banished herself from Babylon, taking only a handful of followers with her north to the Red Forest. They walked for days until their limbs nearly gave out. Adiris could barely move, lying on the floor of a dank cave in a pool of her own vomit. Her foot, rotting and bloated, could no longer support her weight. They came to a realization. There is no salvation. They were all infected, and no one was going to save them. They knelt down for one last prayer. Thick black smoke pluming from the censer, and simply vanished. Thank you so much to all of the talented archivists at the Dead by Daylight fandom wiki. Without you, this video wouldn't have been possible because I wouldn't have access to a lot of the information without it. Your work is very valuable and I appreciate it so much. And thank you, the person watching this video, for sticking around to the end while I cringily talk about a game that I absolutely love. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the Fruit Cup.